But let's just set the stage for structured data systems. As Chris mentioned, there's a lot of energy about unstructured content and the difficulty in managing it. So what makes that different than structured data systems? Well, structured data systems are those that typically are developed to support repeatable business processes. So things that we do on a consistent basis. If we do it, we typically have a structured data system supporting that business activity, unlike unstructured content that is created on an ad hoc basis as needed. The complexity of structured data systems, of course, is that you still have a records owner, but you almost always have an IT support as well. The end user is typically unable to support and manage structured data systems, so those typically are under the purview of our IT department. They typically go through standard lifecycle development cycles, and lifecycle development procedures typically are developed by the IT shop. So oftentimes, they don't take into consideration the records and information management requirements. So examples of structured data systems, our general ledger or accounting systems, if you have Hyperion budgeting forecasting systems, timekeeping, your HRIS, managing your human resource. I've listed a few here that again are structured data systems, systems that are developed to support very specific business processes. So why is it tough? Why are structured data systems difficult? Well, I have to ask the question, what's the record? Many of these systems are relational databases. And a relational database may have many tables within the database, fields within those tables, and then different data within the fields within the tables. So what, in fact, is the record? When we think of the paper world, we have distinct paper objects. In the unstructured world, we may have distinct digital objects. We might have an image of a contract or a Word doc. But in the world of a relational database, what in fact is the record? So let's take a look at that. Here is the example of an HRIS system. And if you look at the middle table, it shows Bill Jones' employee number. This is the employee number data table. Well, that employee number is then related to the table for the pay code. The pay code then goes up to the top table, and then the employee number goes back down to the employee number that maps to a cost center. So in fact, what is the record? We don't really have one distinct digital object. We have a lot of data in a lot of tables. So oftentimes, even though many of us 10, 15 years ago rewrote our policies, our records management policies, to be agnostic and said this policy applies to all electronic records regardless of media, we put everybody out of compliance immediately because they weren't even addressing the issue of what's the record in the first place. So what are some of these challenges? Well, again, we have relational tables and not necessarily distinct digital objects. Most of the records managers in the room came through the ranks 15, 20 years ago when we first started addressing electronic records management problems, thinking about content, context, and structure. An electronic record is one that has content, it has context, it has some relationship to something else, and it has structure. And it maintains that content, context, and structure for a certain retention time period in an unchangeable manner. Well, when you think about the challenge of doing that in a structured data environment, when you haven't even defined what the content, context, and structure is, significant challenge. Most of you are familiar with functional requirements for electronic record-keeping systems. There are many examples out there. There's MOREC, there's ICA, there's the DoD requirements. And they really focus on recordness and how do we maintain recordness. They focus on things like integrity, making sure that a record doesn't change over time. They focus on retention and disposition requirements. They focus on all sorts of life cycle management. When we try to apply those functional requirements to structured data systems, we're stymied. Structured data systems are dynamic. They're meant to do something, oftentimes process information. They're certainly not meant to be stagnant, point-in-time repositories. So again, real challenge in trying to fit a round peg into a square hole. When we think about remediating structured data systems, so in fact they can incorporate that integrity and disposition processing, The cost to do that, the manpower to do that, and the time to do that can be significant. Oftentimes we think about, well, let's define the subset of systems we're going to go to the effort to apply all those record-keeping functionality processes to. And so we might go to our IT shops and say, well, help us divide this world up. Which systems should we be looking at? And they'll probably give you the listings of the critical systems. But be wary, the critical systems are often those that have to be up and running after a disaster. They're not necessarily the records critical systems. So again, we may be talking two different languages, IT and records management. And finally, just another one of the challenges is, in order to really truly address the complexity of record keeping in structured data systems or records in structured data systems, it really does take a village. It's not only the business owner, but it's also information technology, obviously, since that often is the custodian of the data. And then, of course, it's records management and legal, rounding out the team.